The climate crisis is getting worse and worse, but there is still hope. But how can we strive for and promote a sustainable, just and democratic digital future? The next talk will hopefully give us some answers to this question. Maja Göpel is a political economist and expert in sustainability policy. She holds a professorship at the Leuphana University of Lüneburg, and I am very happy and proud to welcome her at the Congress. Please give a very warm applause to Maja Göpel.
Thank you very much, Katharina. Thank you, Rainer, for getting me here. Thank you all for being here on a Friday evening. I'm impressed. And I was even more impressed when I came here. I had been invited formally, and since I've got two little ones, it never really worked out because they wanted to go see those grandparents and then the other ones. But this time around, it did work, and it was the notion, okay, I'm going to hand them over to Dad, and then I could be here in the evening on the Friday. And I thought, is that really good space? And Rainer said, believe me, people will turn up. Thank you for doing so. And thank you for making this place so nice. I mean, a Congress center, usually you come in and you feel like, oh, this is so stifling and not much oxygen in here and not really a very inviting space to hang around. It's a big living room. You've created it into such a fantastic place to be. I understand now why you feel this period of the year should be spent together in such an atmosphere. So congratulations. I'm very, very impressed. And obviously, I'm also really grateful because I only, in 2019, really got the chance to work on digitalization as this big process, as a kind of great transformation, being talked about as something that would reshape our entire societies. Because formerly, I've only been working on the other big transformation that's going to reshape our societies, which has to do with our living conditions, the natural ones. And in 2019, we published a report, we in that matter, meaning the German Advisory Council on Global Change, to the government on the interface between those two big transformations. So 2017 to 2019, we got to work on this in an interdisciplinary setup. And it was really fascinating to see how different disciplines are looking at one and the same thing in a very different way. And how one and the same term is being understood in such a different way by different disciplines. And this is where I felt we need to talk. And for the first time, we started doing a lot of conversations in the process of writing the report, especially seeking out contact with what we've called the tech community, you. Because the eco people are not necessarily so prone of looking at the technological possibilities. There has a history to it, because quite often it was said that, you doomsdayers and sayers, it's all going to be solved by technology. It's all going to be completely fine. We can continue with that same kind of model of economic development and eternal growth without changing a lot, because technology will do the trick. And I think this is one of the reasons why the ones working in the system called biological system were a bit cautious about the technological promises. And yet, we also understand, and the more we dug into the issue, we understand better, without the technological leapfrogging that digitalization offers today, we won't solve the sustainability crisis on this planet. And energy systems are just the best example. If you want to get from fossil fuel-based energy systems, where you can dig in the ground and you suck it up and you provide from a centralized way, to having renewables that are wind and sun and geothermal and maybe burning some of the biomass, are all coming from diverse places, and they're functioning at different periods of time. You need a very smart way of interlinking them. And so there was a very clear case where definitely those two transformations had to be married. And this is why we went into looking at that, and we're very, on the one hand, surprised how little the planet was a subject in the so-called tech community, and how openly received we were. And obviously the Bits and Bäume, now with a big place of stall around the corner, they were one of the things emerging from that, to say these two have to come together and really think about this together in order to make the great transformation an integrated one. Because, and this is what I'm trying to get at, unless we're really targeting the technological revolution at breaking some of those long, persistent sustainability challenges, it won't be the solution. And if we do, it could be. But it was very, very interesting because, as a last remark on that report, and I'll show a few things from it further on, we tried to really write the utopia where that would happen. How would this look like? Like, what would be the system, the society emerging if that was successful? And after about 5 rounds, we completely gave up because it just felt so Truman Show-like. It just didn't come across as an utopia, as something desirable. And so we ended up not writing the one idea of how it could work, but looking at the basically space of imagination, how people that were writing about the technological revolution were thinking about its potential outcomes. And that's a so-called chapter 6, I think it is, yeah, where we've gone into sci-fi literature as an advisory council of sustainable science. Because we said, we're not there yet. We can't do the imagination work. We have to listen to the people that are in that space. Because typically what scientists are doing, they're mapping from the past to then maybe extrapolate in the future. But if we wanted to have something transformative, that is not extrapolated. That is reconfigured, so new. And this was very interesting. Yes, reconfigured. I'll go for that one. Because it came out that there were loads of different possible pathways, and it comes to the point of who's driving those pathways with which ideas. And that put humans in their intent, in a firm space, where we could get to working with and emancipating ourselves from the big stories of where this has to go into trying to intervene in a way of shaping the direction in the way that we think is a desirable outcome. So it's utopian to a certain idea or degree, and at the same time, for me, the only way that we as humans can anticipate where we want to go and make small little dents in the extrapolation of trends today to say, no, how do we bend that one to get closer to the desired outcomes? How do we build a completely new path that was never imaginable before? And this is how I've kind of built up this talk into 4 sections. One is context, where it's a bit like in other places we call it the shit show, where you say, what's the planetary state that we're in? So it's ecological system. And then the next one is about transformation. What is this process like, and how do we try to describe it in transformation research? And then there is the way that we've looked at digitalization playing out in the sustainability transformation. And the last point really is for us to discuss, and I would love to have a bigger chunk of the time to discuss with you all. Could there be this European model that for a long time has been talked about as an alternative to a Chinese or US-American surveillance? I think they're both kind of close in their surveillance aspects. One's called a market thing. Not sure if it deserves to be called a market with such big players there. And the other one is a state surveillance system. So is there a space for that? And at least we've cast out some of the ideas of how the digital revolution could reshape not only our products, but also especially the governing frameworks and our attention. What do we look at? Our architecture of attention, what do we prioritize? And what do we see when we look at the world to make judgments about desirability? So those are the 4, and then I would love to hear your feedback and your ideas and any other things you'd like to add. So where are we at? Sometimes when we're in this place of saying it's all new or it's all different or it's all very special today, I think it is helpful to think about where we are in the longer period of time. also to understand what makes this period very special. And when you look at this big history one, it comes in with a big bang, and then as the solar system forms, and then very later on, 1 million years ago, we're coming into this early humans collective learning emerging 50,000 years ago. Then we started settling. It's called the first big transformation in human coexistence, to come from nomadic, roaming around, into settling, and into shaping something like local societies that would have a particular space that they're connected to, with all the different institutions, storages, and first time also technology applied in a very different way. When you think about carts and wheels, and then animals being used to power those. So that's how transformations are always looked at, as an interplay between the imagination of a society, how I could look at, the technology at place and available, the energy sources. So using animals in a consistent way to power up what humans could do by themselves, but also then the settlements and the institutions, the rules that people are creating to be interacting with each other and to organizing such a society. And then later on came the industrialization, which is typically looked at as this next big reconfiguration of societies. And there, obviously, the new energy source was the fossil fuels, and that just expanded what was the power that humanity had available in the physical sense. And you could use machinery, and you could speed up things tremendously, and you could widen the space and extend the reach of how people could communicate, how people could roam, where they could get to resources, and how they're connected. And again, it was an interplay then also between shared narratives and shared stories. Nation states were formed and totally new institutions were being set up and shaped. And then we've seen, from the planetary point of view, these last 10,000 years being very benign, within which we're now talking about this next big transformation that is of a global scale, with a global connectivity between people in real time, with global reach in hardly any time span anymore, compared to with former, where you had to go with vessels powered by coal. Now we're flying, and obviously it's becoming faster and thus shrinking what we can reach within a day. And the important thing is that from a planetary point of view, the last 10,000 years have been really benign for our species. And that is why the whole idea of sustainability transformation is a very conservative story in the end. It's all about changing the way that humans organize their living, including how they power their energy systems, in order for those climatic circumstances that you see up there in the Holocene, the last 10,000 years, to stay within that fluctuation that made us anticipate the seasons, that gave us continuous rainfalls to work with, that didn't have so many droughts and floods, that were making it very difficult for humans to do agriculture or to service their very high-powered economies as of today. And this is why this benign Holocene is something we shouldn't risk. And that is why I keep on wondering how some parties that call themselves conservatives cannot get this as a priority. I don't understand how anybody that talks about individual freedom and liberties to be safeguarded cannot get this. This is securing freedom in the future. And obviously, as we have in the title here, the question, when this changes rapidly, who gets to be protected? Who's going to be behind the dams? Who's in front of it? Who's going to be leaving zones that have dried out because of droughts? And who's going to put up fences? That is a question of social justice. So how can any party that's concerned about social justice and equity not get this? How have we come to a situation that only green parties are associated with this agenda? What went wrong there? In the end, this is not green. In the end, it's our lives that we're talking about. are potentials to really do the things differently. Because when you look at how we got to that place where things get a bit shaky, that's the great acceleration. And it means that the way that we consume today, that we organize our economies today, that we power them, etc., is not normal or something that's always been that way, but that has fundamentally changed. Obviously, it's also changed with it because of better provisioning, and you see the socioeconomic trends are the things that are on the human socioeconomic side going up, being better. This meant that more people survived, and also the whole human population. I've just read we are 8 billion now on this planet for New Year's. This whole population has grown a lot. Huge success story from that end. Less people died, more survived, and longevity went up as well. So we stayed around longer. On the other side, that means the way that we do it has eaten into what our planet can replenish. So those curves should probably be flipped the other way. I'll try to make that as a suggestion. Because we don't have as much carbon budget anymore as we had before. We're talking about having to stop emitting so much. We don't have the same marine fish capture possibilities if we've run down the stocks to a certain degree and they implode. So this is exactly the conundrum that we're after, to try to understand how do we provide well for people without eating into what our planet can regenerate for us, so we can do that in the long term. And the most important thing that I only learned through writing that report and getting into the history is that we are a bit late discovering, and you know that much better than I do, digitalization as a trend. Because it was firmly behind the possibility to accelerate like that. To make things more speedy, to connect more widely, to extract more from deeper places, to discover those, etc. All has to do with the way that we've used digital technologies. And this means they have been servicing human imaginations of the future, and they were very successful unto the point where we more and more clearly saw that we're now in a state of great emergency. We've accelerated a bit too much, or at least with too much waste and with too much surplus that we're taking out. And this is from the Planetary Boundaries framework. It's been first published in 2009 by a team of system scientists that were trying to say we're having an issue that's beyond climate change. You see, it's just one dimension in there. And we have a chance, and I remember having a conversation before the report was published, Planetary Boundaries, a safe operating space for humanity, it was called, because they wanted to avoid the same things happening after the Limits to Growth report in 1972 by the Club of Rome, where everybody got so upset about questioning that prime success model of growth. So a lot was being done to undermine the message, etc. And they said, how do we make people understand that this is about maintaining? It's not questioning something, but it's maintaining what we've inherited. And this is where they've come to identify these 9 different dimensions. And you see that each one of them in itself is pretty important. When you talk to the natural scientists today, they have a bit of a competition. What's worse right now, the biodiversity crisis or the climate crisis? Brand new is the novel entities. That also I got to learn through an expertise we got has a lot to do as well, not only from microplastics, etc., or chemicals that come out of drugs we use, or the kind of hormonal intensity in our groundwater, etc., rises up through the pills that we're putting out there. But it also has to do with newly compounded materials to be feeding into these very microscopic solutions that we now use in digital devices. So we are spreading a lot of things that we won't ever be able to gather back again without knowing yet what they will do to the living systems. And that is something to put much more care to and not carelessly start when we don't even know how to reverse the trend. And that's the whole message there, to say, how can we steward this better? How do we understand it well so that we can manage it for the long term? And there, obviously, it is completely important to see how digitalization can also support this. Once and if we understand, and this is one of my favorite quotes from Pavan Sukhdev, that the way that we power our economic systems has to very much change. Because that is the real software behind what is being made possible, who can get revenues with the development, who is going to make investments, and who's going to cash in from investments. And this is why Sir Maja Göpel, he was writing about biodiversity, put out this one statement. The problem with the notion that nature is indestructible is this: it is wrong. And once economists accept that they are mistaken on this count, it would revolutionize the way in which we calculate economic progress. And it is, for me, sometimes fascinating to see how little valuable, from the old school economic lens, healthy systems are. You're a real terrible business case for a health system if you just work, if you don't have pain, if you don't need joint replacement, if you're just okay. No good business case for the health system as we have it today. It's much more convenient right now to say, oh, we're going to replace everything with deep tech, and it's going to suck down the carbon once it's emitted, etc. Much more lucrative than saying, how about we're just not going to mow down more forests? They're the most tremendous carbon sink, maybe only topped by more peat places. They're fascinating. And if we stop drying them for agriculture, it'd be less lucrative, but it would be the most fantastic carbon sink. A functioning biological system that regenerates itself healthily is not a good business case in this model. And this is why we have to change it, the way that we look at things that are valuable in the outcome, and we have to be very clear that it's breakthrough or breakdown. Transformation is happening anyway, by design or by disaster. And this is why I felt, after all these crises that we've had and this call for back to normality, and now we have to stop, and here and there, it's not going to work, and only the alternatives have to say how much they're going to cost and how people are going to be impacted by it, we completely lack communication, transparency, and data being put out on the costs of maintaining the status quo and why it's not normal. One of my favorite things is this notion of, oh, we can't possibly eat less meat. It is a complete assault on our freedom. A, meat consumption has gone up like that. And B, who would have ever thought that civilized people treat animals and their neighbor for Eastern European countries in such a way just to be able to eat twice as much meat as is good for their own systems? That's quite a crazy outcome. And this is why transformation is always being looked at something that has several levels. And those levels are interlinked, but they also change at different speeds. This is the multi-level perspective by Frank Geels and others, and it's social, ecological, technical systems they look at. So they're trying to understand, how does this all play together in the different societal settings? And what you see, I've been describing, the first bit is this Earth system and how that's changing. That's the landscape, that's the backdrop against which everything that we imagine and invent is going to have to take place. And everything that we do is going to impact how that thing develops. But in the very short term, we won't be able to affect it directly. Just with climate change, right now we have a break period of 20 years. Even if we stopped right now with the emissions, it would take about 20 years until we have that stop in the cascading CO2 cycles. And this means we have to anticipate and act early. A systems message. And then we see that sometimes the change in what the meso or regime level contains is a bit slow, or it needs a lot of warnings that are being disregarded for it to change, and to change quick enough. And those meso level or regime levels are the ones that are kind of shaping our freedoms to act. So a certain economic paradigm I've been referring to is very dominant from the science side of saying, what can we afford to do? Why is it terrible if GDP goes down? What is it going to mean in terms of cost-benefit analysis, which are typically not including the environmental costs or the long-term costs in any decent way? policy frameworks. I think we've all been witnessing how the last 2 years were quite daunting when people were trying, or politicians were trying, to change those policy frameworks. I mean, just now we're seeing that, I think it was 1902, I don't know when this subsidies for diesel fuels in the land use sector were being established. Now they should be taken away. And we have a huge upheaval against updating the policy frameworks under which, in this case, farmers operate. Because it changes the market patterns, and that make it easier for one particular way of doing things and more difficult for others. Social practices, what are we used to be doing? What are our routines? What do we feel is inconvenient or something you can't ask of people? Has a lot to do with it. And obviously the technological possibilities that are available. And then typically who is driving change comes from the niche in the micro level. People that are deviating from what we'd call the status quo to try to bring about something different. And quite often it's terms of, or periods of crisis where they're being looked at and listened to more intensely. And what I find important when we think about systems, that we never forget that there are linkages between all of that. Because sometimes we feel so isolated, or sometimes we tend to say, oh, the consumers don't want to change, or the producers don't really offer anything, or the policymakers don't give the frameworks, the investors won't go with it. What in the end, what we need to do is to really think about how can change in behavior or orientation in one place really mean that someone else can also change. That is the kind of way of linking the relationships between the elements and understanding those to understand why dynamic of change are evolving. And as I said before, this purpose and this grammar of what is being said to be something, a positive development or a negative one, obviously had a lot of influence on what we deem to be possible or desirable. And this is where I feel a lot can be done to improve our understanding of where we are and to make sure that it always depends on how we explain the world, what people can imagine as the next possible step for changing. And this is why the way that we talk about things is so important. And I've been flipping back and forth now to recast some of the dominant framings in a different one that will then also make the entire possibility space look different, but also the desirability. It's not freedom inhibiting, but it's freedom enhancing once you take up a time leap ahead. Once you think about others that are not in the privileged spaces that can build the walls. And this is where it's so important to really think, do we have the systems mindset and do we have an awareness of the ecological base upon which we are all operating as beings, but also, on the other side, the technological imagination and abilities to say we can organize a lot of those relationships and solutions in a much better way. And this is why I think we should be putting so much emphasis on talking about how do we want to live. And when you speak with people today why they're so tired about the transformation is because many say we don't even know where it's supposed to be going. So what is the vision of a society that we want to live in? What is that common digital future that we're aspiring to, where sustainability and best technology come together? How do we get there? What is the pathway? Because then every effort is a step in a direction. Right now it feels like it's going back and forth, and no one really knows why this is leading to something and what that something looks like. And digitalization obviously has been playing an important role in this, both as a promise that automatically something like sustainability would come out of it, but also as a threat. I briefly want to go in this before we go in the imagination. Sustainable digital infrastructures and digital tools for sustainability have been discussed, I think, before the crisis even more. It's like, okay, energy mobility systems I mentioned. Then the circularity can only work if we have digital twins, I learned a lot about, and modeling and where things are going, and so that you have an idea where you could find resources without them going to the bin, becoming part of a production process again, etc. Obviously, there are great examples about decentralized energy systems, but also something like currencies that can be shared over smartphones and get to women, for example, in very remote places that formerly did not have a chance to have access to credit and thus build their own businesses. Social cohesion could be increased, but could also mean we're going into more divides. depending on how we use the technology. Power, I think generally when I think about when we first thought about this, 2019, and now I'm a bit on the kind of dystopian side, to be honest, so you have to help me correct this. But the whole power notion and the idea about democracy, the public discourse, this necessity of having a shared imaginary space and agreement about reality that we're shaping is undermined intentionally by the ones that are using what's been called social media as a very asocial way of driving wedges in societies. And this is why it's so important when we think about the possibility of digitalization to think about different orders of impact. That's what we've been coming from the resource search, because that's the most obvious one. When you start thinking about how can digitalization help, it's this first order impact. How do we really make sure that we're getting the CO2 curve down, the resource use down, think about all the planetary boundaries, make them come down, to do things better, do them more efficiently. Including, and I think that's the point where I'm a bit lost and I need your views on, this notion of generative AI, ever deeper data, neuronal networks, quantum. What is the actual added value compared to shallow AI? Is it worth that amount of processing power, that amount of energy? And now we had the first issues with water in California and other places. So what's the leapfrogging technological advance in comparison to what more is being taken out of the planet? For me, is one of the things where I feel the discourse might not necessarily show us the cost benefit in a very helpful way. Because the second order impact is an important one, which is not only looking at the products, but comes back to the system thinking. A proper circular region, which Ostwestfalen-Lippe, where I was born, is one good example, or Bottrop or others. They are really trying to see how can we make this a circular space from the industry, and how do we use digitalization, online platforms, communication tools, etc., to make that happen. That goes beyond making one device better into how do we share better? How do we create access better? And how do we get to that third order impact, which would mean the imagination of how we can provide for human need satisfaction without everybody having to have everything, because we need to use it. So it's more using than having. And that would be a completely different way of thinking of mobility systems, or thinking about also a nutrition system, but also living spaces. It would not necessarily mean having it forever as well, but moving around and creating houses, for example, where you can rebuild the walls after a particular time when the kids are out. You just make it smaller, someone else can come in. It really is about systems design to cater at the least or the lowest ecological footprint to human needs. And when we think about those impacts, we come to different thoughts about where is the development of the technosphere as we see it right now, with all those different aspects, again, that you know much better or much more about than I do. But each one of them allows for different tweaking, a different seeing, a different connecting, a different reshaping than what we had in space or in place before as technological possibilities. But the big question always is, which purpose is served, and who tells the stories about which transformations are unavoidable and where you thus have to get behind? And when the biggest benefactors from generative AI are the ones that are saying every single business model that won't have that in its core will be out of business in 5 to 10 years, you have a nice self-fulfilling prophecy in there. So how do we change the story on every single business model that doesn't really think how technologies can get to that formula of best performance at lowest footprint will be out of business? That will be a challenge to put up. And this is why for us, and it was a bit daunting because the eco people are already anti-progress, right? And then you come out with a message where you say, technology, yes, is super important, but if it is going to be a savior, depends. It depends on what is the purpose that we gear them towards to. And that is not decided in the technological space, but that is decided and negotiated in a pre-technological space of societal decision-making, and policy frameworks. And this is where I feel is maybe the most important place for many that are very cognizant about that revolution to speak up. To say we can think up the best technological solutions, but they're only going to either make it out of the niche into the mainstream or be staying on that purpose track if you change the governing frameworks. And I mean, your history, the internet, how it started, was it supposed to be coming, and now what it has turned into. Facebook, meeting friends, and now manipulating people, making them really unhappy. I mean, this whole idea about what can grow under which kind of investment patterns, and then what kind of investment ideas and return on investment notions of how much you want to earn, is not necessarily bringing out the most benign or sustainable development business models. And this is what we should be talking about. That was the thing that we've said in the report. Our common digital future really has several dynamics, if you want to see it coming towards sustainability. They all start now, and they're going to pan out in different time spans. We really have to act now on the ecological crisis, because otherwise we're going to cross those thresholds where it's going to be very, very difficult to repair any of that. But we also really already see, and sometimes I wonder if we're not having the social change kind of overtake the environmental one. When you look at the most recent developments now, how much is it going to impact who is going to take part in societal decision-making and how? And is democracy still going to work if we're systematically eroding a common base of agreement, what we call reality, facts, and evidence base? And then the third one, this whole notion of who do we want to be? Even if we were able to replace everything that animals do for us, that plants do for us, with something artificial, is that really a place that we want to live in? I'm always a kind of party pooper when have you seen those kind of Vodafone dogs? The red robot-y ones that come and then they kind of wander and waddle around, and they have these green eyes and they go "Hoo" on their legs when you come too close to them. And people are so fascinated by these creatures waddling around the Bits and Pretzels and other places, and I just think, look at the real thing, and you see how deficient the replication is. Why do you build things that are replacing what is already there? I don't get it. Why don't we build the technologies and the solutions that are in service of life, that make life for the ones that are already there easier, and then really be clear about it's a branch point. We can either have digitally supported sustainability, really look at the guardrails, the planetary ones, use all the possibility to map systems and their development patterns and their tipping points to avoid them, to ensure social cohesion, or it's going to go exactly the other way. And the same holds in the other areas as well. New humanism, what is the mindset with which technologies are being developed? And what are the ones of the people that are most influential in this? I don't necessarily think that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and other Silicon Valley investors have a very friendly view on the vast majority of the other people on this planet. They tend to be in their way. And this is why this notion of self-confidence and speaking up for the world that we want to live in, instead of leaving that prediction about where we can live and how it's going to look in that future, is being left to the ones that are out there to gain a lot from that development, if it was technology, and that really don't care about how many people come along, but only about them being in the cockpit. And this is the conversations that we should have, and this is the kind of guts that we should have, because there's three possible pathways, I think, that we're seeing, and that's my concluding remarks. A is this elitist consumption control. for me, it's radical radicalism. It's this libertarian, totalitarian account of destroying any former role model that we had of a world of democratic welfare states, where actually the rules are kind of counting for everyone, even if you're a tech billionaire. And digitalization, I mean, move fast and disrupt first, build monopolies, get out of the market system, make sure that you build new systems and you sit on top of it. The second one is the one that doesn't really look at the planetary effects and things we're already getting there. But these unintended side effects, because we're not anticipating enough, where things fundamentally go in the wrong direction, or not gutsy enough because we're trapped in short-termism and policymakers can only act when the, shit already hits the fan. That means we're going to rebound off the cliffs. We're going to be too late. It's going to be shock-based innovation in our societies, but we want to have innovation societies that are anticipating and imagining where they want to go. And this is why I think, even though it might sound a bit utopian, but what is that web of life and technology? So how do we reshape the social cultural forms of delivering on key system function, in this case also human needs, social security, welfare, economic stability, nature conservation, and really say digitalization should be a means to higher ends. And those higher ends are democratically chosen and democratically being put around because it's our planet to live on and not just a few. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very inspiring talk. And we now have quite a bit of time for some questions. So if you want to ask something, please stand in the line. And we also have the possibility to post questions via Mastodon or IRC. But I would suggest we will start with number 2.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Do you think that capitalism still has answers to the problem you named?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing only because Thilo, I don't know if you're in the room, Thilo and I just had a longer interview and he was drilling me towards that. Can you say capitalism now? And I think what is really important are two things. A is with this version of highly financialized capitalism, there is no solution, especially not as this financialized way of talking value, value creation, etc., is more a value extraction by now that doesn't pay a lot of care to the either social or ecological systems through which the money is being channeled to make more money. So it is not in the service of creating value in the true sense that we all imagine it to be. So unless we're reconnecting financials with real world values, no chance. And this is where things that we might deem are a bit too limited, too tame, etc., like the taxonomy, but also impact investing or a carbon price are all kind of political reactions to that understanding that we have too much of a decoupling between the financials and the real values. If that comes back together again, we still start from a completely highly unequal space. So I don't think without changing that towards a more equal share of possibilities to be taking at least 4 or 5 roles in society where you're shaping its direction, that won't work either. Those roles are as a consumer, as a citizen, and we know when you have a bigger pot of money, those impacts are higher in both of those roles, but you also have 3 more roles that not everybody else in society has, and that is as an investor, as a role model, because that's who we look up to, they've made a lot of money, they must be great, and as someone high in an organization, because typically high money returns comes with hierarchy in an organization. So unless we also think about how much hoarding a lot of wealth in terms of financials means that you're more likely to play in all those roles a much more impactful role in shaping societies, we're not going to get to something that's democracy in the real sense. I don't know, I've said before, I don't really care if we call it capitalism afterwards or no. For me, it's most important to really name the trends and get working at the trends, because what I've witnessed so much is, bam, ism stamp on your forehead. And then they do the flip side of saying, if you're not for capitalism, then you must be either for communism or socialism. And we've seen in the past that doesn't work. The best system we've had is capitalism, so shut up, right? End of conversation. So I'm indecisive. I think it is very important to say this type of capitalism as we have it right now has no chance to serve a sustainable future or serve everybody, full stop. And if whatever comes afterwards is called capitalism with some prefix, postfix, whatever fix, I don't care. We can also call it something different.
So next question would be number 1.
Hi. You mentioned imagination a lot in your talk, and I really appreciated that because to be able to shape something, obviously we have to be able to imagine what we're trying to shape and the new shape and all of that, right? So my question is, are you familiar with solar punk? I assume you are. So the second question is, do you see a role of solar punk in all of this, in the transformation that has to happen, and what role would that be? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I would need for you to say what you think solar punk is in total. Like, what are the different aspirations they're going into?
What?
Is it the...
I mean, it's a lot of things, right? It's a literary genre that is there to help us imagine the future that is after the transformation, or helping us imagine the transformation, right? But it can also be understood as a movement, as a practice, as a way of actually making the transformation happen, right? So it's multifaceted. So I guess the third question is which of those two, or like somewhere in between of them, like would you see a role? Do you see a role in this transformation?
Mm-hmm. I think it's always both. And I do think that giving it just one label is limiting where we could go to. Because what I've learned from doing a lot of campaigns is it's very difficult to really describe exactly where you want to go and where everybody can write their names under. But it's much more easy to say on what we don't want any longer. And this no and is a better strategy. And then you can align solar punk and you can align other places in the bits and boymen, whatever else, to say we're totally in agreement on what has to stop and what we'd like to see more of. But we don't have to give it one name necessarily, but it can share some, I don't know, we tried principles before as something that has a clear idea about systems design, but is not saying how exactly it has to look. So I think what is really the most important is that we refrain from making it too small, too early onwards. And at the same time, be completely clear that what is in place right now has no future. Every single sustainability projection says business as usual scenario.
No.
Terrible idea, right? So yes, that means no, not maintaining what there is, but trying something else. And this is where then the variety, and when you thought about the niche players, ideally we have a bit of a diversity, especially because culturally different spaces function differently. And some narrative or some imagination works better in one place. We did a research on sustainable development strategies. What are the best sustainable development strategies? And it very clearly came out, also as Bertelsmann Foundation at the time, that it always was very important how it was labeled. So in Bhutan, it was the gross national happiness. In Ecuador, it was buen vivir. And then in Germany, we were more technocratic, so we were okay with nachhaltige Entwicklung. And then others need slightly different ways of saying it so that it resonates with something that's already in place. And you will always have to look at as well what kind of policy changes or governance changes you want to do depending on what's already there. And this is where I think this balancing act is, and saying there's similarity that we don't go behind, and then we will see that there's multiple solutions that we will need, and we'll probably never end up with exactly the same in different places, which is great, because we need diversity anyway.
Thank you.
Do we have a question from the internet, from Mastodon or the IRC?
Yes, the internet likes to know what are the next political steps need to be taken.
Mm-hmm.
Easy question.
Right, don't really stand still anymore. I wonder, I mean, I think for me the biggest defense moment will be the European election probably, which is already in the next spring. Because when I think about where did I see more visionary approaches, it was in the Commission, where they had, under the Green Deal, the tripartite with the digitalization and the social equity and the green transition as the three main anchors, and we're literally trying to link those across institutions, also from a systems change point of view. One can judge whether it was really successful or no, but I don't even on the German level see an imaginary space like that, or an idea unit it was called, where people from all different directorates were coming together and we're really thinking about, if you want to have those outcomes, what are the different policies from different areas on the EU level. And the EU is the only one, at least for a digital market and for any market size, that would be big enough for saying this could be the new industry, or this is something that would be able to live up in geopolitical times as we have. Smaller than that, I think is just unrealistic. So for me, the EU election is something that is probably the most important to get attention to and to make sure that it's not being taken over by lots of people that have one thing in mind, that is destroy the European Union. And then we can talk about, after that, what we might want to say to Volker Wissing, and if he really feels that's a digitalization place that he's governing over. And then certainly a possibility to push again that there might be something like a digitalization strategy that actually cuts across resorts and has a purpose to it and an idea to it. Oh, I don't know if that's going to happen in this legislation, or maybe it's going to be parked to the next one. So the EU, I think, for me, is the most important level right now.
Next question would be number 1.
Hi, so you mentioned a report you wrote or you worked on a lot, and I was wondering where we'd find that report to read it and so on. Because if you said I didn't hear it, and I would really like to read it.
Yeah, it was on the slides. And it's called Our Common Digital Future. But I didn't say the report is called Our Common Digital Future. So yeah, it's 2019. The website is www.wbgu.de, and you can download everything for free there in English and in German.
Thank you.
Number 3, your question.
Yes, Maja, let's look into this room. More than 1,000 people here. And today, these are experts, highly skilled workers. So, unfortunately, maybe we are today part of the problem. Tomorrow, we could be part of the solution. Do you have a simple message for us how we could contribute to the transformation?
Mm-hmm. I think if this purpose was really nailed down and asked for to be made transparent from your community, that are the innovators, the ones that know where we're going, would be hugely important. On the KPIs for startup financing, on the KPIs what open innovation should bring into places, on KPIs what digitalizing bureaucracies means. Don't put what's there on digital speed. Transform them first so that they can achieve goals and include citizens much better and be more effective in processing information before you put it on a digital system designed to deliver on that purpose. Transparency. I think if you could help with an architecture of awareness to say, we always really want to be very clearly showing what does maintaining the status quo cost us, so that we shift the burden of proof on the ones that want to stay where we are, away from all these alternatives that don't get out of the niche, but have lots of answers on how that sustainable life could look like, that'd be fantastic.
And another question from number 4.
Yes, hello. You mentioned the farmer protests in Germany and in Netherlands, and it's a bit strange to see people that are very much at the forefront of climate change. They see it in their everyday work, yet they are protesting against changes that are supposed to be good for the climate, and right-wing populist parties are kind of co-opting these kind of protests. So that's very much, I think, something that is a strange development, and I was wondering if you have any idea how that could be prevented.
I wish. Well, I think that the overall challenge is that we have accepted to call what is currently the status quo normal, and that we've been used to a promise that political forces are only then legitimate in a democracy if they make everybody constantly better off than the year before. And on that basis, democracy has its social contract. And only the ones that have least organizing power are the ones that know very well that that promise is only holding for some much more than others. And I feel what is very important is to there also open up, the time span, to look at what kind of subsidies have been paid, what kind of business models came out of this. And some of the biggest farms are so big now because through the subsidy schemes, the small ones all went bust because it was per space, per hectares that you got compensated, or per amounts of animals. So it had an inbuilt concentration factor. And then obviously those are the ones that take a lot of that power in terms of public space and loudness to defend the subsidies being taken away again. So the losers from changing policies tend to shout loudest if they can, if they're in the upper echelons. And this is where I feel this notion of where do you want to have your business model contribute to is something that you at least can have in a private conversation. So it really depends on the spaces that you design. I've had those with farmers where I said, first very angry, and then we got into talking about what is it that you love about your profession? And then slowly but surely they come to the point of saying, we would just like to be able to live from our produce, but we've been shoved in a system where that's impossible. And then you can talk about how you would get back into this entrepreneurial spirit. That doesn't hold for everybody. Some just really think it's great to have that entitlement of 300,000 euros every single year before you've done anything. Yes, I understand. But that has to be made transparent and said, nice, but it is one of those, like, the way that we keep animals. Like, how did that happen? How could we have been so ignorant of those side effects for so long? It has to be corrected. But it takes the political courage, and it takes this opening up of what is it that we're talking about? Is that a business model? Is that something you can be proud of? Is that a produce that you associate with and you feel is in your profession or in your identity, something you're proud of? So that's the pull factor in this kind of liberalizing or liberating yourself from a system that constrains this. And you get it from engineers, you get it from designers, from architects. They know how much better they could do things. And they feel constrained by the way that right now the financials are working, or the subsidies or the standards. So that's the pull. And the other one is, you confront the ones that really don't want to change and don't want to be asked into shaping the change. Tell them that it is something that we understand would be nice to keep, but it's just not working if it's supposed to be becoming a system that works for everyone.
Dear Maja, I thank you so much for this inspiring talk, and I would love to listen to you for hours and hours, and we have still lots of questions, I know, but unfortunately our time is up, so I say thank you, and once again, one warm round of applause, please, for Maja Göpel.
Thank you. Thank you.